All right. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
The way that tonight is going to work, as some of you might be wondering, I have limited the sound and the video for all of those joining our lecture this evening, just so we have a really smooth presentation. And if you have any questions, there is a chat box enabled. Questions, I'll moderate those at the end of tonight's lecture and send those over to Nick. But for ease of tonight's lecture, this is being recorded. I just wanted to let you know it is being recorded and we have everyone's cameras and audio off. So as most of you know, my name is Colton Martin. I'm the Director of Sacred Music here at Parish of St. Dominic's, and I'm so excited this evening to be welcoming all of you for our inaugural Aquinas Series lecture by Nick Petrillo. And before we begin, I'd like to invite Father Brian, who's on the call right now, to begin in prayer.
Thank you very much, Colton. And Mr. Nick Petrillo, thank you very much for being here with us this evening. I am really, really excited about this program. As we all know, art and architecture and music are so instrumental to our faith, to our religion, it's our expression of our love for Almighty God. And no better way than to do that now together than in prayer. And so let us pray in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let us pray. Almighty God and Father, you give us the great gift of architecture, music, and art. It is in turn our gift to you to express our love for you through these mediums. We ask you to inspire within us a great, deep devotion to you in all things, especially through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, as together we pray. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Saint Dominic, pray for us. Benedicate omnipotens Deus, Pater et Filius et Spiritus Sanctus. Amen. Once again, thank you so much, Mr. Colton Martin and Mr. Nick Petrillo, for being here this evening to bring us a little closer to understanding and really grasping the depth and the beauty of what art and architecture really can bring to all of us as a great gift.
Thank you for those words, Father. Before we begin tonight, I just want to say that I'm so excited, again, reiterate, to offer this wonderful new avenue for learning, for community fellowship in this time of distance, for social engagement among members of our parish community, our choir members, our Rosary Altar Society, all the members of our ministries, and to bring them into engagement with great Catholic scholars, great thinkers, men and women of faith, all around good people who can share with us their love for their disciplines. Tonight's lecture is sponsored by St. Dominic's Parish and St. Dominic's Sacred Music. I highly encourage you all to keep up to date with the incredible wealth of resources on our parish website. Mary Jo Behuniak does a wonderful job running that. And don't forget, of course, to check out all the exciting things happening here in our music program on the Sacred Music portion of the website. This new lecture series has been titled the Aquinas Series. St. Thomas Aquinas, also known as the Angelic Doctor, is a saint with whom many of us are familiar, especially given his Dominican roots. He was perhaps the most influential Catholic thinker and writer of the medieval church. He wrote and preached about what we call the three transcendentals: truth, goodness, and beauty. In tonight's presentation, we're going to enter through this third door of beauty, as we discover what it means to talk about church as sacrament. How many times have we entered through the doors of a church, our home parish, a grand cathedral in a nearby city, an oratory as we travel abroad? How many times have our spirits been captured by the intimate silence we encounter in stone and glass? Before I introduce our guest speaker this evening, I leave you with this thought from the great poet Goethe. Music is liquid architecture, and architecture is frozen music. It's now my privilege to introduce you to Nick Petrillo, our presenter for this evening. Nick is a lifelong Catholic, but he hasn't always been interested in what the church has to provide. Since rediscovering his faith on retreat and college, the church has been an influential and constant presence in his life. He's traveled around the country doing retreats with Net Ministries for 3 years, and then spent 3 years studying in the seminary. Throughout his travels, his appreciation for art and architecture has deepened and has come to appreciate the signs and symbols hidden in plain sight. On his bucket list is visiting every cathedral in the United States, an endeavor his lovely wife, Jen, now accompanies him on. He is currently a religion teacher and campus minister at St. Rose High School in Belmar. Furthermore, Nick is a very good friend and dear colleague of mine, someone whom I deeply respect for his depth of insight and his sturdiness of faith. Thank you for being with us tonight, Nick. I'm going to turn your video on now, and we can begin our presentation.
Well, thank you, Colton. Thank you, Father. The way you guys have been speaking about this program, I'm feeling a little underqualified, but I'm very happy to be here, very happy to do this. Architecture is something that I greatly enjoy. And at one point in my life, I desired to be an architect. But the Lord called me in other directions, in other platforms, other avenues. And I never did become an architect, but it's something that I've greatly enjoyed and appreciated, and have grown in a deeper love for over the course of my life, especially in regards to churches. So all of that being said, I am not an architect. I'm not a church designer. I have no formal education in church design and church architecture. All of what I know is just from my own reading, watching videos online from some really great people, brilliant minds. And the beautiful thing about it is that the church is designed for people like us that aren't, the Thomas Aquinas, that aren't, the Michelangelos or Da Vinci's, that we aren't these great architects, but the church is designed to bring us to the truths that they saw and were calling us to in the relationship with the Lord. So I'm going to try to share my screen with you all so you can see the images I have. The pictures that you'll be seeing, I think I have all of them. All of them are images that I've taken throughout my travels in the U.S. And abroad. Is everyone able to, I guess, if someone, Colton, if you wouldn't mind, I guess, sending a message just to make sure we can all see. Great. So the title of this presentation is called Architecturally Speaking. Trying to get this full screen here. Architecturally Speaking, the church as sacrament. I didn't want to do that. Apologies. The church as sacrament. And the church in the small c sense that it's the individual parish, big C church being universal church, Holy Mother Church, and small s sacrament because church buildings are not sacraments in the way the Eucharist and confession are, but they reveal to us an invisible truth. And this first image is St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and Father led us in a beautiful prayer. But I'd like to share with you some words from Scripture to kind of help us enter into our time together tonight. For we are God's co-workers. You are God's field, God's building. According to the grace of God given to me, like a wise master builder, I laid a foundation and another is building upon it. But each one must be careful how he builds upon it. For no one can lay a foundation other than the one that is there, namely Jesus Christ. Do you not know that you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person. The temple of God, which you are, is holy. That comes to us from 1 Corinthians chapter 3, 9 through 11, and 16 and 17. And while we're talking tonight about the physical church, the building, I think it's important for us, and perhaps we've, with greater ease, realized how we, the people, are the church, given the pandemic, especially earlier this year when we were, churches were closed, the doors were locked, and we were in our homes, our house churches, and perhaps some of what you hear tonight may inspire you to bring some more sacred images into your home. So to get things started, I want to start off with a big fancy church word, teleology, which really just asks the question of why. Why was this building built? What is the purpose of whatever? Teleology, regardless of what it is, it asks why. And while this predates me, the Baltimore Catechism said that man was created to know, love, and serve God in this life so that we could live with him forever in the next. It's why we were created. We were created to know and love God, and we were designed to accomplish this task. God's given us the means to do it. He's given us reason. He's given us senses. He's given us the ability to understand who he is, and he has revealed himself to us. Now, all things are created for a purpose, but not all things achieve that purpose well. A washing machine that is broken, or the washing machine is designed to wash clothes, but a broken washing machine does not achieve that purpose as well as a machine that is new or properly working. But it's designed to wash clothes. It may accomplish it in a very roundabout way, but its teleology is to wash clothes. How it accomplishes that is kind of what we'll be looking at tonight. Does the church building bring us into this mystical, transcendent relationship with God? So I'm going to post a few pictures here, and I'm sure you'll be able to identify what this is, which is, of course, a steak knife, which is designed to cut meat. And this, a chainsaw, designed to cut wood or trees. Both are designed to cut. Their teleology is, at its core, the same, to cut, but they're designed to cut different things. Could a steak knife cut through a tree? Probably. You'd need a lot of steak knives, a lot of time, and you'd have really big muscles at the end, but that's not what it's designed for. Similarly, a chainsaw would have no problem cutting through a steak or the plate and the table that it's on. So they're designed for a purpose, and when used for that purpose, accomplish that purpose well. But we can take these things and use them differently. But again, that's not why they're created. So churches, in the same way, are designed to bring us into, remind us of this relationship with God, remind us of the union we had in the garden, and be different than our day-to-day lives. Because when we go to church, we're not going to the office. We're not going to the grocery store. We're not going to the ordinary. We're going into the presence of God. So there's something set apart and different about the way the church is designed. So before we get into that, we're going to play a quick game where I'm going to show a picture, and you'll probably instantaneously be able to know, identify what it is. And we'll build on this as we move forward. So this is a grocery store. Don't know if it's a Wegmans, a ShopRite, a Food Town, an A&P, but that doesn't really matter what specific food store it is. You can tell it's a food store by the way it's laid out, by the display cabinets, and just the copious amounts of food that we see on display. Similarly, we know this is a movie theater based on the giant screen in the front, the way the chairs are situated, the velvet carpet down the middle. A very fancy movie theater, not the ones I'm typically in. And this, a different theater, an opera or like a Broadway show theater, more opulent. It's a more refined form of entertainment, much more gilded space. But again, all the attention for the seats is focused toward the stage where the action is taking place. And this, an operating room, whether we've been in an operating room or not, watched, medical shows or not, there's something about this that says, this is a place for medical procedures. You got the gurney in the middle, and maybe not the gurney, the operating table in the middle, a lot of machines, a lot of lights, and it looks very sterile. So all of these clues kind of telling us that this is the place for operations. And our last one is a courtroom. And don't know where it is, but we can see that the person and action of importance is front and center. The judge is at the head of the room. All of the attention focuses there. So all of these buildings, all of these spaces are designed for a purpose. And just by seeing the picture, you were probably able instantaneously to identify what that is. We're going to come back to this. We're going to play a very similar game a little later about churches. Is it a church? Is it not a church? But before we get there, kind of have to lay out some groundwork of what churches are and how they ought to be designed. So churches are legible. We are a pilgrim people. This life is not it. We are on our way home. We are on our way to God. And churches reveal this eschatology, another fancy word for end things, that, and we celebrate Advent, we celebrate the incarnation, but we also call to mind that Christ is coming back, and churches remind us of that pilgrim journey through life into life eternal. And when we read scripture, we hear that our first parents, Adam and Eve, dwelt with God in a garden. And you may see a lot of garden imagery in churches, and the columns, flowers at the top, Corinthian columns, things like that, or just even plants, shrubbery in and around the church, in the mosaics and the artwork, reminding us of that union that we had with God. And more modern churches may tend to have giant open windows out on, these beautiful vistas and landscapes. And as beautiful as that is, after the fall, creation has fallen too. So we don't worship nature. We can, it reveals God to us, but the world is fallen. And when we go into the church, we're reminded of the kingdom of heaven and the relationship in the world as God had created it in the beginning. And if we walk into a church and are kind of left scratching our heads, we may ask ourselves, is the church accomplishing its goal? Does the church bring us into that relationship with God as well as it can? Does it draw our attention to one place, the altar, the tabernacle, when the Mass is being celebrated, the priest who's in the person of Christ? Or are we kind of left, lost? And I will admit, when I walk into a new church for the first time, especially if it's a gorgeous church, I'm very distracted during the Mass, looking at the ceiling, looking around. But again, all of these things should direct us to the places where the action takes place, the altar, the ambo, the tabernacle, all designed to bring us from this life into the liturgy. So a couple building terms as we move through this. And it's important to remember that all space inside the church is a sacred space. Any place, even outside the church, can be considered as such. The sacred space is not limited to nor exclusive to the sanctuary, since it can be defined by any space where sacred images, symbols, or activities are found. And then there's also liturgical space, which is space where the liturgy happens. Again, that's not exclusive to the sanctuary. That's the, place par excellence. But if we think of liturgies, baptism starting, perhaps outside the church or halfway down the aisle, that's all part of the liturgy. The communion procession, the presentation of the gifts, funeral rites, funeral masses happening at different places in the church. So it's not exclusive to one place. There are many parts where these things can happen. And a few terms you see here, just kind of defining what they are. The narthex being a gathering space inside the doors before you enter the nave. And it's a sacred space, and that it's the place where we welcome people. We're greeted. I'm afraid to know how many people, walked into a church in faith, perhaps after many, many years away, and instead of being greeted warmly, were, greeted with a sour look or a "what are you doing here?" that turned around and left. So it's not what we would think of necessarily as a sacred space, but again, all of this is inviting us into a relationship with Christ. The nave, that's where we're most familiar with, where the pews are, where we sit, where we stand, where we kneel, where we gather for Mass. And the sanctuary is the place of the sacred action, the culminating in the consecration of the Eucharist. And when we're in the church, especially during Lent, we move around the church for the Stations of the Cross. That's a pilgrimage in and of itself, but it brings us around the church. We journey with Christ. And I've always wanted to try to do a little bit of research into, the way stations are designed and laid out. But they often tend to start closest to the tabernacle, loop around, and then come back to. So we see in the church as well, again, outside the sanctuary, places where liturgy, prayer can happen. And the biggest usual sign of the separation between the nave and the sanctuary is an altar rail. A lot of churches nowadays don't have them. Many of them have been removed. Some are putting them back in. But the purpose of it wasn't to say, the priest is better, I'm holier than you, but it lets us know that there's something different about that place. There's scriptural parallels to it, that what goes on there is holy and sacred. The Eastern churches still have iconostases, which block the view of the congregation from what's going on, which in some ways is a beautiful thing. Like, there's a mystery. We're enticed by that. What's going on back there? We're interested. But again, it's a mystery. We can't fully comprehend and understand everything that's going on. And the liturgy comes to us as we go to the Eucharist. So there's just a lot of stuff already that's just kind of in front of us that may have been in front of us our entire lives, but that's just the way it's been, and you may not even think to ask why is that there? What's the point of this? And the altar rail is that kind of demarcation, but as we know in Scripture, when Christ died on the cross, the veil in the Holy of Holies was torn and heaven was opened to us. And at communion, Christ comes from the altar, comes down to us, and we receive him and in the Eucharist. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful sign and symbol in the church, how that happens, how the liturgy moves us in that way, and hopefully how the church itself is designed to bring us into that narrative. So in massive churches, gargantuan spaces, we may be lost. We may be overwhelmed by the size and space of everything. I'm thinking of St. Peter's. If you've ever been in there, you walk in those doors and it's just massive. And if it weren't for the giant baldacchino, we wouldn't know where the altar was. It would just get lost in the space. So baldacchinos are really just a canopy over the altar to help us find where the altar is and focus our attention there. We see that, we're drawn to it, and we know that there's something important there because it's the only place in the church that has it. Or there's, in some churches, what is called a reredos, which is a structure behind the altar, often containing images of saints or holy images and relics and things like that. Some churches have both. Some of them, the reredos was part of what could be called the high altar, but when the altars moved out for the Mass the way it's celebrated now, there's a little bit of a demarcation. So they may have been built separate or kind of now serves as that function as a reredos. But again, all of these things are just to draw our attention to the altar, to the sanctuary, to say, hey, this is where the important stuff is happening. So we ask ourselves, are we illiterate? And now you may be thinking, no, I can read that. I'm clearly not illiterate. But architecturally speaking, we may be. We may be unaware of so many things that are right before us because that's just the way it's been. So hopefully by the end of tonight, we'll understand a little bit more about how these churches are designed and what they're here for. So these are stained glass windows from St. Rose Church in Belmar, with the parish attached to the school where I work. And they are some of my favorite windows. They're gorgeous. The colors in it, the images are beautiful. But at a cursory glance, we might just see beautiful images. But if we look at them, starting with the top left, going across, and then finishing in the bottom right, we see that it's an image of the Annunciation, and then Mary visiting Elizabeth, and the birth of Christ, and the presentation of Christ in the temple, and finding of Christ in the temple. And we have here the joyful mysteries of the Rosary. In the church, you can walk to them, another little pilgrimage within the church, entering into an aspect of Christ's life. Yes, they're beautiful. Yes, they're great to look at. Yes, they tell us a story in and of themselves, but they do so much more than that. We can look at them individually and isolate it, or we can step back and look at the bigger picture, which is unfolding before us. In a similar way, these are the windows underneath the rose window at St. Paul's Church in Princeton. I don't know how many people enter through the front, the main entrance there, but anybody that does on their way in or out is literally walking under the sacraments. There, you look at the rose window, we're reminded visually of the sacraments, baptism, reconciliation. That one was a little tough to figure out, but it was kind of based process of elimination. And you can just kind of see, the instruments of Christ's passion, reminding us of the effects of sin. Communion, confirmation, marriage, holy orders, and anointing of the sick. So we see these windows are there. They've been there probably since the church was built, and we walk under them. But do we think about what they mean to us, that we're entering into the church, we're reminded of our baptism? When we go out into the church, and we can pray for the Holy Spirit to live out the gifts that we've received, to cooperate with the grace we have, to build up the church, to share our faith, and to do all of these things, to bring the food that we have received in the Eucharist out to others in the community. So it's just a beautiful reminder of what the church offers, what the church provides, and the sacramental life of the church. But if you're there all the time, you may just, oh yeah, that's the windows. It's pretty. When I was traveling around with Net, in different parts of the country, we'd be like, oh, how often do you go into the city? If we were in Seattle, like, I don't really. It's kind of like us living perhaps close to New York City or Philadelphia. People that aren't as close may, think we're there all the time, but because it's always there, we may not go. So that same idea that we're maybe blind to the things that are right in front of us. So sign, symbol, sacrament. Signs are primarily about relaying information, like a bathroom sign, handicap sign, no smoking sign. Tell us what a space is or is not. Symbols are images which invoke a feeling on a conscious or subconscious level. It is a sensible expression of a present reality and does not stand for that reality, but reveals it. And then the church is filled with both of these things, but is in its own right sacramental. And sacraments, of course, being an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. That's big S, sacrament, and the church is a small s, sacrament. We could say the sacrament, efficacious signs of grace instituted by Christ and entrusted to the church, by which divine life is dispensed to us. It's from the Catechism on Sacraments. But also just, they make visible and invisible reality. The church and the liturgy bring us into the heavenly realities. The church building is a physical representation in the art, the statues, the windows, the mosaics, the music of the invisible reality that is heaven. But if we don't know what these signs and symbols are, we miss the deeper meaning. If we don't understand or believe in the transubstantiation, the Eucharist is just a piece of bread and remains a symbol. So churches possess all of these things, which are designed to bring us into that heavenly reality. They're liminal experiences, they're liminal places. A liminal experience is just kind of like a threshold moment in our life when something changes. And we have them in the secular world of turning 18, you can drive, get your license and vote. 21, you can drink. 25, you can rent a car. I think I just got something in the mail from AARP. I am going to be 35 this year. I think they're just looking for, to send out mail. But there are liminal experiences in our life. And so too sacramentally, baptism, reconciliation, confirmation, Eucharist, marriage, holy orders, all of these things are experiences. Once we have them, there's a change in our life. And it often involves a denial of the old self and embracing of the new life. Same thing liturgically. We move from the real world, our everyday life, into the heavenly reality. We acknowledge our sins at the beginning of the Mass. We listen to and are challenged by the Word of God proclaimed through the readings. We celebrate and receive the Eucharist, and we become what we receive, the body of Christ, gathered in the church. And then we're sent back out into the world to transform it. Go out and make disciples of all nations. The seminary I was at in Baltimore, St. Mary's, all of the inscriptions in the church were in Latin, with the exception of one on the front facade that said, "Go teach all nations." And the reason they put that in English as opposed to Latin is because they didn't want anyone to know that they were supposed to do that. They wanted everyone to know that if you're a Catholic, you are to make disciples. You're to go out and teach. And if you don't know Latin, you could go, "Oh, well, I didn't know any better. I couldn't read it." But you know English, you know what the goal is, you know what we're supposed to be doing. So we have these threshold experiences in life, in the liturgy. So too architecturally, we move from the narthex, we move from the world, come in from the world into the narthex, into the nave. From the nave, we process to the sanctuary to receive the Lord. And at the end of Mass, we are sent back out. So there's, and hopefully if we're participating in the Mass well, we leave differently than we entered into it, that we are changed by what we hear, we're changed by what we receive, that there's something different about us as a result of what we've experienced there. So I know I was surprised to hear that there's no official design or official style of church architecture. They've taken many forms over the millennium, from the house church and early church history to the giant Gothic cathedrals of the medieval period. And it's not necessarily a question about beauty, which is subjective. Gaudi's Sagrada Familia in Barcelona, I'd love to go there. I've never been. I think it is one of the most beautiful structures I've ever seen in my life, via picture. But I know other people that consider it one of the most gaudy and awful things. But the symbolism that he has in there, again, just brings us somewhere else. So beauty is subjective. It's not a certain beauty level that has to be achieved. And I believe that there may be some quote unquote ugly churches that tell the story well. In one of the books I was reading in the seminary for an architecture presentation I was doing, I came across this quote: "The most beautiful space in the world is worthless if the people in the space aren't doing what they've gathered to do." So you can have a beautiful church, but if it doesn't lead us to worship God, it's not doing what it's designed to do. I've seen hundreds upon hundreds of churches in my travels, and I truly believe that there's no such thing as an ugly church, if for no other reason than it's where God dwells in the Blessed Sacrament. Some are more pleasing to the eye than others, or tell the story a little bit better. But again, Christ dwells there, and that in and of itself is a beautiful thing. The church is more concerned with purpose. Does it aid or hinder the faithful in their worship of the triune God, or does it help us enter into the Paschal mystery? And when building or renovating churches, materials and environment, of course, finances play an important role. If you can't afford to build a church decked out in mosaics in the entirety of it, like the Basilica in Washington, D.C., or St. Louis, which I'd love to get to, can't wait to get to, that's okay. There's nothing in the church that says, if you don't have this percentage of mosaic, it's not a church. And just even looking at the images here, we can see some similarities, but also some great differences in the way the churches are designed and accomplish their goal. So all of that in mind, we're going to play the game again, name that space. And if you're able to respond via chat, I would encourage you to do that. I'm going to post a picture, and I want you guys to, as quick as you can, guess whether or not you think it is a church. So if you think it's a church, say yes. If you don't think it's a church, say no, excuse me. And I'll wait a few seconds before I give away the answer. So first one, is this a church? Let's see if I can find the chat. We got one no so far. Yes, question mark. This is in fact a church. Now I'll preface as well, not all, the churches may not be Catholic churches. So, whether or not we want to argue them as a church or not, architecturally, are they designed to be churches? But the answer to this one is yes. This is Holy Trinity Church in Geneva. These few pictures and the first round of pictures I didn't take. But this looks more like a planetarium to me, or a science museum. It doesn't really convey churchiness. Second, is this a church? This is a church, the Third Church of Christ Scientist in Washington, D.C. It looks more like an apartment building with a really, really solid doorbell system. And perhaps it was the bells that led you to say that, yes, it was a church. but again, looks pretty drab, looks even more like an office building with the window there and the vertical blinds. This one, is this a church? And the answer to this one is no. It's a memorial in Macedonia. Looks a little bit like a modernist home or a soccer ball. And the parish I grew up in, the stained glass windows kind of looked like the window above the entryway there. But no, that is not a church. I think we have two more. This is the Pilgrimage Cathedral of Mary, Queen of Peace in Velbert, Germany. Also a Catholic church, but it looks kind of like Space Mountain or the vehicle that the Jawas drove around in the first Star Wars movie with again an apartment complex in front of it. But this is a church. And then now there's two more. Is this a church? And perhaps surprisingly, the answer is no. It's a Armenian genocide memorial in Armenia. It does have a spire, which we may often associate with churches, and kind of a futuristic, modern kind of building there, but it is not a church. And our last image, to which the answer is a yes. Perhaps you see the cross at the top of this giant spire. But again, it kind of looks like a rocket ship or a clown hat, not what we may often associate with a church. So even if it's only based in stereotypes, many of these churches are missing something or lots of things. It doesn't tell us what it is. It doesn't necessarily convey a deeper reality. Some of them weren't even all that inviting. And before we began, Colton was talking about the truth, beauty, and goodness. And hopefully churches convey all of those things. But if it doesn't convey a transcendent truth or direct us toward God, we're left wondering what its purpose is. And if it's hard to tell from the outside what draws us inside. And despite the advice to not judge a book by its cover, in reality, it's something we do and perhaps struggle with on a regular basis. So buildings, it's that same thing. Some of the buildings you looked at looked like churches, but weren't, and others did, but weren't. So as we've mentioned before, there are no official styles of church architecture, but there is a purpose for its design, however it is decorated. Church architecture is not entirely up to the whims of an architect or architects, nor should it be. We are inspired by the Word of God. We have things revealed to us. So churches should be influenced by Scripture. We have the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, the temple built by Solomon, and there are parallels between the way churches are laid out today and how the temple was built in the Old Testament. Again, it reminds us of the garden, and there's imagery of the new heavens and the new earth in the book of Revelation. Again, these images should inspire the way churches are built and designed. If you look at some churches from above, it looks like a cross with the altar being in the center where the heart would be. The heart of the church is the Eucharist, and the arms, the body, are where we are going out into the world. Numbers play an important role in Scripture, and so too do they in church architecture. Now, anytime you see something in a group of three, it's not necessarily the Trinity or four in the evangelists, but they call to mind these aspects of our faith. And again, perhaps hidden in plain sight right in front of us. So now I think comes the real fun part, where there's a lot of pictures, a lot more pictures and we look at a few specific aspects of churches. And the first and perhaps the most obvious to us is the crucifix. And one of the first easiest signs that you're in a Catholic church as opposed to a Protestant church is that the cross has the corpus. It reminds us of Christ's sacrifice, the cost of discipleship, because Christ tells us, whoever wishes to come after me must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. So depending on where you are and when the church was built, you'll notice a few different features. A crucifix having, again, the corpus, perhaps a giant one permanently affixed in the church, or just a processional cross that's used at the beginning and the end of the liturgy, a crucifix on the altar, and other images of the crucifixion around the church. And when you see them, I encourage you to really look at the crucifix. They're not all the same. For example, the Spanish tend to really show the gore and the suffering of Christ with the cuts and the bruises and the blood. I was having a conversation with the priest in West Virginia once, and we were talking about the crucifix, and he had one in his office. He's like, look at that crucifix. What does it look like? It looks like he's asleep. Like there's nothing, it doesn't show the pain, it doesn't show the suffering, it doesn't show the agony. And he said one of the cleaners, the maintenance at the parish, asked him if they wanted him to paint blood on the cross, on the body. He's like, no, thank you, but we don't do too well with that here. But it reminds us of what Christ went through, what the effects of sin are. And we see in the cross, we see in the crucifix, the parallels between Moses' staff in the desert when people were bit. They looked to the staff and they were healed and they were saved. We look to the cross as the source of our salvation. That is from the cross that we enter into life. It is from the blood of Christ that our sins are washed away and we enter into that relationship with him in a deeper way. This last image that came up in the middle on the bottom, if you look closely on either side of Christ, you see little images. On the left, you see a little cloth with a face in it, which reminds us of Veronica as she wiped the face of Christ. And the beautiful thing about that, when I think about that station, is that we've given Christ really nothing. We've given him a cloth to wipe his face. And he's given us an image of himself. He gives us more than we can ever give to him and gives us more than we even ask for. And on the other side, it's a little hard to see, but it's dice. There are dice there because the guards were casting for his lots. Or were casting lots for his clothing while he hung on the cross. Again, if we just look at it and go, oh, it's a cross, a cross, it's a cross, it's a cross, we miss the deeper story that's being told here. And the one on the bottom right, we have Mary and John at the foot of the cross, but we also have an angel holding a chalice as though to receive the blood that was flowing out from the side of Christ. And Bishop Barron, in one of the videos in his Catholicism series, says something beautiful about the paradox of the cross, that the Romans thought of it as this taunting, terrible, and it was a terrible means of death. But here are the Christians, here are we, thousands of years later, saying we're not afraid of that. That's the worst you can do, and we've defeated it. And it's the standard by which we enter. The Mass begins. We follow behind the cross, leading us to our salvation. Baptismal fonts. Many older churches in Europe have separate buildings for the baptistry because you couldn't enter the church if you weren't baptized. So they built a separate building so you could be baptized, so you could then move into the bigger church. And a lot of times, the baptistry in and of itself is a beautiful building, decorated with images of Christ's baptism again, just calling us into this relationship. While it's seldom the case in the United States that there's a separate baptistry, you may notice that some older churches have the baptistry or the baptismal font all the way at the back of the church for that same reason, that you're not yet a member of the church, you can't come in. Perhaps for more practical reasons, baptismal fonts may be halfway down the aisle. Again, that idea that we're moving from one life into another. And if we look at some of these baptismal fonts, we see the shell, again, reminding us of John the Baptist, of the shell being the vessel by which the water is poured over us. Some of them are massive and you know, full immersion. Others are smaller. Some are made of stone. Some are metallic and more easy to move. In this last image, we see the dove as it descended over Christ at his baptism. So again, right in front of us are these images calling to mind what it is we believe, what it is we're confessing, what it is that we profess when we go to be baptized. And when we bless ourselves with holy water, we're remembering our baptismal call, our baptismal promises. And you know, whether it's from the main baptismal font or holy water fonts, we still are called to mind those vows of baptism. Ambos, seldom are they as elaborate as the ones we'll see in these pictures today because of the advent of microphones and speakers, but it's the place where scriptures are proclaimed. It reminds us of Jesus on the Mount, Moses on the Mount, speaking to us God's word, God's truth. And oftentimes they're decorated with the evangelists or the prophets, those who went before us heralding the good news of Christ and of God. And before the dawning of microphones and speakers, they were primarily just to elevate the person that was speaking so they could be seen and be heard. But rather than just build a box, again, they go deeper in revealing to us some truths about our faith. So it's more than a pulpit. It's in and of itself a story that invites us into a relationship with God. That if Mass isn't going on and you look at some of these ambos, we're told what its purpose is for. We're drawn into something more than just a box. This image on the bottom left has some Moses and I forget one of the other prophets. But again, just these great figures that have gone before us, speaking to us of God's truth and of his goodness. I wish there were some more of these types of ambos in the area. St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York has a beautiful one, which I believe is, actually, I don't think I have that one here. The one in the top middle, I believe, is from Sacred Heart Cathedral in Newark, which I believe is a little bit bigger than St. Patrick's, and perhaps a little bit more beautiful. Both of them are stunning. So we have the ambo, which brings us to the evangelist, often depicted with a tetramorph, or the four living creatures that surround the throne of God. We can read about these figures in Scripture, in Ezekiel, and as well as Revelation. And we see these figures, and when we see them, we see these, we see the gospel writers, or we might see their figure, their image next to them, and they're always depicted with the same one. If you see a person, you see four statues together, and there's someone with an angel or a winged human. That is Saint Matthew, and the tetramorph speaks to the way he began his gospel with the genealogy of Jesus, focusing on the human ancestry of Christ and a particular focus on his humanity. Mark begins with his depicted with a winged lion, because he begins in the desert with John the Baptist, and the wild, and focuses on the majesty of Christ, the lions being the king of the jungle. Luke with the winged ox, because he begins with the story of Zechariah, who was a priest. Priests offered sacrifices. Ox were a sacrificial animal, and it focuses on Christ's sacrificial character. And lastly, St. John with the eagle, because his gospel begins in the beginning. Its theology soars over all of the other ones, and it's kind of the culmination of the Gospels and the scope of what he covers. So we see, again, in these figures that may be before us all the time, these random animals, like, well, ox don't have wings, so we might write it off or just think of it as, some weird fantasy type of thing. But again, there's a deeper meaning behind those images. The tabernacle. The tabernacle reflective of the Ark of the Covenant from the Old Testament, flanked by angels in worship and adoration of the Lord. Again, perhaps decorated with signs of communion, with hearkening to what takes place and what's inside there. This image that just came up is a tabernacle of a church in Oklahoma that's designed to look like the church. So this is the church in scale form, that the church is the home, is the house where Christ dwells. So again, the tabernacle, we see it. A lot of times it's front and center, as it should be. That's why we're in the church. But again, it's not just a box. It's not just a gold door. It reveals to us so much more. It contains so much more. And there's something about it that draws us to it. And in the churches, there's the sacristy, the sanctuary candle, the little red candle that if you're in a massive space and you have a hard time finding it because it's, low to the ground, you see the sanctuary candle, that's where the Eucharist is. And I've heard this, I've heard it a few times, that on Holy Thursday, Good Friday, when the tabernacle is emptied and the Eucharist is reposed, there's a candle lit reminding us of Mary's faithfulness and presence at the foot of the cross. And I think I've heard that they put it in a blue case to remind us of Mary as opposed to the traditional red. But a beautiful, beautiful image with that. We come to the altar. These are in no particular order, the way we're going through them. The altar being the place of the Eucharistic sacrifice. It may look like a table, and in one sense it is. We're gathering for a meal. The Mass, in some ways, parallels the way we entertain. We welcome people into our home. We share stories. We talk. Then we gather around the table for a meal. It's not our dining room table. Something different about it, often much bigger, made of stone, a lot more elaborate, beautifully decorated. But it's reminiscent of the altars of sacrifice in the Old Testament. Most altars contain a relic of the saint, of the patron of the saint, of the parish, or some other saint, or perhaps a relic of the true cross. And they also include on it 5 little crosses in each of the corners, and then one perhaps in the middle, reminding us of the 5 wounds of Christ, because the altar is Christ. Christ is both priest and victim. So the altar isn't just a place for Father to put the books and the chalice and the paten so he doesn't have to hold everything. It is itself the place of sacrifice. It is Christ to us. It is calling us back to Calvary. And before concelebrations of masses were allowed, churches had many, many altars. Again, if you go to St. Patrick's Cathedral, lining the nave are side altars. Some of them, I think, have probably been removed to put in some other things, but priests would be there celebrating masses on their own. And in some of the altars, they're decorated with images of the Last Supper. Again, calling to mind what Christ instituted on the night he was betrayed. Some of them are reliefs. Some of them are painted in. We also see the Lamb, hearkening back to St. John in the desert, behold the Lamb of God. Again, a lamb being a sacrificial victim. The perfect sacrifice is a unblemished lamb. Christ, without sin, unblemished, took on sin and was the sacrifice for us. I remember when I was a kid, I asked my mom, why do we call Jesus a lamb? I don't remember if she ever really got back the answer to me on that, or just, pawned me off to the priest. But it's, we see it, we look at the altar, this bottom right picture, we see a lamb. We don't worship lambs, we don't sacrifice lambs, but it reminds us of the sacrificial nature of Christ. So too, similarly, is the pelican. We don't see these ones as often as the lamb or, the Last Supper, but you may notice pelicans in and around churches. The pelican coming to us from the medieval ages of when it was believed that if a mother pelican couldn't find food for her babies, she would pierce her breast and the babies would feed on her blood. She would feed them with her very life. Again, reminding us of the sacrificial nature of Christ, his blood being true drink, and the means by which we come to life in him. Statues, the classic Catholics worship statues, which of course is false. We don't. They're reminders of holy men and women that have gone before us. That remind us that holiness is possible. The general instruction of the Roman Missal says that care should be taken, that their number not be increased indiscriminately, and that they be arranged in proper order so as to not distract the faithful's attention from the celebration itself. There should usually be only one image of any given saint, which, when you think about it, you don't often see St. Peter multiple times in the same church. There is a church in our diocese that I won't name it. It's, again, there's no, to the best of my knowledge, there's no penalty if you violate this. But I was talking with the priest there. I said, it's really odd that Jesus is being held by Mary in one statue and Joseph in another. You usually only see one statue of a saint holding the baby Jesus, but both of them were front and center. And it was just odd to see because you don't often see it. But it makes sense that both Mary and Joseph would have held them. But again, beyond just the reminder that these people existed and their witness to the faith, we learn a little bit more about who they are if we look at the images and the things that they're holding. Saint Bartholomew, a lot of the apostles are depicted holding the instrument of their death. Not all saints do that, but the apostles tend to. Bartholomew was flayed alive. Jude was beaten to death, so he's got a club. And, a lot of other saints are depicted with things that were, an aspect of their life. Today we celebrate the feast of Saint Therese. A lot of her statues, she's holding flowers, roses, and a crucifix. Again, she's the little flower. At the end of her novenas, often someone receives a rose kind of unexpectedly. So again, kind of hearkening us, telling us a little bit more about who these people are. And we may also see skulls at the base of some statues, reminding us of our own mortality. but not all statuary is gruesome or about their death, as noticed in this image by St. Peter, often depicted holding the keys to the kingdom that he received from Christ, and St. Paul as well. He's depicted with the sword, which is kind of a double-edged, literally. It's the means by which he was killed. Roman citizens couldn't be crucified, so they were beheaded, because that's more civil. But also the sword of the Spirit, which is, pierces our hearts and hearkens to the letters that he wrote. You see him with paper often as well, again, reminding us of his contributions to the scriptures. And we'll come to the Blessed Mother, the first tabernacle of the Lord, and true church built of living stones. Mary is our mother and exemplar of faith and virtue. Her beauty and humility have not been, nor could be surpassed. All she is and all she does leads us to Christ. And so often, if there's an image of the Blessed Mother, she is with Christ, because her goal is to lead us to Christ. She doesn't look to upstage Christ. This statue was outside the chapel of the seminary I went to, and I love it. If I could have brought it home and gotten away with it, I would have done that. It's one of the most beautiful statues that I've seen. But oftentimes as well, if you're in the church and there's a statue of Mary, if you're looking at the altar, she's on our left. But if you move into the sanctuary and are looking out at the congregation as though Christ is sitting on his throne, Mary is off to what would be Christ's right. Again, hearkening back to Scripture, where the Queen Mother would sit at the King's right hand. It's not always the case. There may be some churches where she's off to the right if you're looking at it, often because that might be where the Sacred Heart is, or the tabernacle if it's not central. Mary always defers to Christ, but again, always leads us to him. And the last thing we'll discuss before I open it up for questions is a difference between cathedral and basilica. Not all cathedrals are basilicas. Not all basilicas are cathedrals. There's slight differences. It has nothing to do with the size. It has nothing to do with the beauty. It's a basilica is a distinction given to the church, that specific church, by the Pope, because of their antiquity, dignity, historical value, architectural or artistic worth, and significance as centers of worship. So a basilica must stand out as a center of active and pastoral liturgy, according to the 1989 Vatican document, Domus Ecclesiae. Within the basilica class, there are two. There are major or papal basilicas, all in Rome: St. Peter's, John the Lateran, Mary Major, and Paul outside the walls. St. Paul outside the walls. Every other basilica is a minor basilica, and there are some in the U.S., also in and around Rome and Italy and the rest of the world as well. The most famous basilica, of course, being St. Peter's, which is not the cathedral parish of Rome, contrary to popular belief. The Pope is there the most because it's the biggest and it can accommodate the most people. But the cathedral church, the home parish for all the people in the Diocese of Rome, and subsequently the Universal Church, is St. John the Lateran, which is not named after St. John Lateran, but St. John, I forget the full name, it's like St. John the Evangelist and Baptist and something on the Lateran Hill. Rather lengthy name, but that is the official cathedral of Rome. So how can you tell when you're inside a church, whether it's a basilica or a cathedral? Well, if it has this red and yellow umbrella called an umberlino, it is a basilica, and you would often also find this tintinabellum with the papal seal, the papal tiara, and the crossed keys. The umbrella often open partially, as you see in this image, in anticipation and expectation of the Pope's arrival. And often these two signs, these two symbols of the basilica are usually on opposite sides of the church for, probably just aesthetic purposes and balance, to balance out the church. A cathedral will have a cathedra, which is just a fancy name for chair, the sign of the bishop's authority, and a cathedral is the mother church of a diocese. So again, a cathedral may also be a basilica. The cathedral in the Sacred Heart in Newark is also a basilica. But the cathedral, the mother church of a diocese, and the seat of a bishop are in our diocese here. We have St. Mary's in Trenton, and a few years ago, St. Robert's in Freehold was elevated to co-cathedral. There's a cathedra in Trenton and a cathedra in St. Robert's in Freehold. The cathedra is the bishop's chair. Only the bishop can sit there. It often has his episcopal seal over it, again, hearkening to his title, his authority, and his role within the church. So if it has a cathedra, it's a cathedral. If it has the umberlino in tintinabellum, it is a basilica. If it has all of those things, it is a cathedral basilica. Oftentimes, if you're watching the news and they're talking outside of church, every church, it seems, when they're on the news, is a cathedral. When it's not, it's a church. All cathedrals are churches, but not all churches are cathedrals. So I like to end with that little distinction, so you can impress your friends when you talk about it. Oh, actually, the Pope wasn't, when Pope didn't celebrate Easter Mass at the cathedral, he celebrated it at St. Peter's Basilica. Well, what's the difference? Let me tell you. So I do have a few recommendations here if you're interested in learning more about church art and architecture. I've read two of these in their entirety and excerpts of one, and am waiting to read the other. So all of that being said, the book I've not yet broached is this one on the left, Catholic Church Architecture and the Spirit of the Liturgy, by Dennis McNamara and Scott Hahn. I've listened to a number of Dennis's presentations on YouTube. If you type his name in, you'll get a bunch of videos. Really, really great, really, really smart guy. He was in the diocese a number of years ago. He, I believe, designed Holy Cross Church in Rumson, and he was out giving a presentation on that, which is where I got the second book, the one in the middle, How to Read a Church, a Crash Course in Ecclesiastical Architecture. It's a really small book. It's not quite pocket size. It could be if you have big pockets, but he wrote it to really be able to be brought into a church, and you just thumb through, and he's got a bunch of illustrations that are beautiful and really short explanations as to what things are, why they're in the church, what they mean, what they do. I've read through a lot of that, and it's super easy. It's not in any way, shape, or form like a dense academic book. This first one is a bit more how Catholic art saved the faith. I read that last summer. Really, really good book. Elizabeth Lev, again, if you punch her in on YouTube, she's got a lot of great videos. She does a lot more with art and statuary than architecture itself. But that book is really, really good and talks about how at the time of the Reformation, it was really like the birth of Catholic art, and how these artists conveyed the truths of the faith beautifully and powerfully and in moving ways. And then at the bottom here, it's not so much a book as it is a document written by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops about designing of a church, about how it should be built, how it should be decorated, and things like that. Again, it's not a you have to do this, that, and the other thing, but guidelines for how those things should be done. and inviting the congregation into the part of that process as well. So a few sources, a few resources available for you if you wish to look at them. Again, a lot of what I shared with you came from Dennis's materials and some talks I've listened to of his. And I'm currently enrolled in an online class, seminar really, about church architecture that he's the teacher for. So if you've enjoyed the presentation, thank Dennis McNamara. If you didn't like the presentation, blame Dennis McNamara, because the information is, a lot of it came from him. But I hope that what I shared with you was informative and perhaps hopefully in some way inspiring, and that the next time you're at church, whether it's St. Dominic's or elsewhere, we look a little deeper. We look not just with the eyes of our body, but the eyes of our heart, the eyes of faith. And if there were to be like a blessing of not being able to go to our parish during the quarantine, it was the opportunity to go to different parishes, to go to different churches and see them, and really experience the universality of the church. And again, these things can be found in grand cathedrals and your little parish church in the middle of nowhere. So thank you, Colton, for the invitation. Thank you, Father, for again, for the invitation and hosting this series. I think it's a great idea, and I hope to tune in for the other ones. I hope you were able to learn something, and I'll stop talking now and turn it back over to Colton. If there are any questions, I'll do my best to answer them for you as well. So thanks for being with us, and God bless.
Thank you so much, Nick. It was
You're welcome.
Such a pleasure to have you with us tonight, and I'm sure that I'm not the only one applauding on my end of the screen. And we, again, express our gratitude. Thank you for coming and speaking. I did take a screenshot of those books there at the very end, and I'll be sending those along in an email, just so you all have the titles of those if you'd like to do some more reading.
And all of those can be are available on Amazon. That's where I glommed the pictures from. So
perfect. And this actually, behind me, this is a virtual picture of my office and all the books that I have yet to read, most of them. But
yeah.
The Dennis McNamara one on sacred architecture is excellent. That's in my library, and a really, really great place to start. I also want to put a small plug in for our good friend, Peter Carter. He and another friend of mine, Dr. Jennifer Donaldson, who teaches at the seminary up at Dunwoody, they co-host the Square Notes podcast, and they've actually done interviews with many great scholars across the world, including Cardinal Sarah. Elizabeth Lev also has an interview with them on a topic related to her book. So if you're interested in getting an audio bite of an hour podcast, I would suggest looking into the Square Notes podcast. They have some good stuff there as well. So if anyone has any questions, I'm going to ask the first one, Nick, if you don't mind, and give other people a chance to send in through the chat box here any questions they might have. My question has to do with the current climate, COVID, quarantine, and especially related to this this transition that we've seen from shutting down and seeing mass on our laptops, on our phones at home, and then perhaps to mass outside in a parking lot, and then slowly coming back into the church. I just wanted to know if you could speak a little bit to perhaps the importance of maintaining some of the elements of sacred architecture, or the definition of a sacred space in this challenging time, whether that be in your home or in a parking lot or in the church.
So I think you kind of put what would be my answer kind of in the question there. I think a lot of that, even pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, when things are back open, I think a lot of it can just be the way we dispose ourselves before we go. What are we listening to on the way to church. I know I'm guilty of not reading the readings ahead of time, so often hearing them for the first time when they're being proclaimed. But if I enter into it more that way, I'm better disposed to hear what's being proclaimed. In the same way, I've never gone to the movie theater and just walked into a movie to watch a movie. I see the trailer, I get interested, I go watch the movie. If I know what the readings are going to be about, I can get excited about it. But I think even more than that, just having sacred images in the home, a crucifix somewhere, images from important sacramental moments of our lives. When you walk in the front door of our house, you see right before us, as you walk in, a picture of my wife and I on our wedding. Below that is a papal blessing. Either side of that is on the left is the Sacred Heart. On the right is the Immaculate Heart. And then if you turn hard right, we have a giant palette wall that I made filled with crucifixes. And pretty much everywhere you look, it's a reminder that, God is real. The saints are, surrounded by the saints. And then just trying to make that space wherever it is. If you're in the parking lot mass, having something there that you're not just sitting in your car, that there's something different about what you're doing. When we were attending masses at home, especially on Sundays, we'd put out a white, it was a bed sheet because we didn't have white tablecloth, but we covered the coffee table where we set the laptop for the mass. So there was something different about it. It wasn't just a coffee table. I didn't put my feet on it while we were watching mass. We lit candles. We took one of the crucifixes and put that on the altar as well, to just remind us that we're in this space. And because it's we are not just body, we're not just mind, we're body, mind, we're body, soul. And if we're only focused on the one, the other's lacking. And I know if I'm too busy being distracted by the beauty of a church, I'm not really listening to what's going on. But if I'm so engrossed in that, I might, not appreciate, what's before me. I don't know if that actually answered the question at all.
No, it does.
But I think it's just, bringing those little tangible reminders where we go. Carrying a rosary in your pocket, for example. It's, oh, hey, this is here. Like, God's with me. So that's what I would say.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else have any questions? You can put them into the chat box and just send it to, make sure it's either sent to me privately or it can be to everyone. While we're waiting on perhaps one question that I encounter a lot as a director of music, and this also deals with, you talked about there not being necessarily one type of architectural style that has the stamp of approval, or like this is the Roman Catholic way we should build churches. Similarly, there's a discussion, in music or the arts, and a lot of questions I get tend to hinge around conversations that deal with Vatican II. And so I was wondering if you could maybe just speak a little bit to perhaps the role of the Second Vatican Council. Oftentimes what I hear is kind of this sense of things used to be, why don't they make churches like they used to anymore, right? As in there's something missing, or, why doesn't church sound like it used to anymore? Yeah. And I think sometimes that can be misconstrued as an intentional break, perhaps, or an intentional hard left, when perhaps that may not have been the case. So in terms of architecture or your experience, what do you think? So
Vatican II can be a whole conversation and debate in and of itself. Some people that, I've heard say, there hasn't been a beautiful church since Vatican II. But I think the idea was, again, just kind of helping us enter into the liturgy. I haven't been to too many Latin, traditional Latin masses. I've been to a few, and there's definitely something moving about it. But the first time I went to one, I was in the seminary. I went for a class, and I remember thinking, like, I feel like the Jews at the bottom of Mount Sinai. Like, Moses goes and then comes back. He's like, this is what God wants you to know. I'm like, okay. And I was that was my experience with it. But again, it's beautiful. The church we were in was beautiful, which is kind of great that I didn't understand what was going on, because I could just look around and not feel like I was missing anything, because it was all over my head anyway. But I think the goal for Vatican II, my understanding was to try to make it more approachable, and perhaps, some things lost in translation. I hear a lot of people say, well, on paper, Vatican II was great. The documents are wonderful. The documents are, beautiful and moving, but how it was implemented for some may leave something or many things to be desired. But I think, and perhaps sometimes it does go a little too overboard, that it looks like you're just in, a living room somewhere. The church I grew up in was often referred to as, this is a Catholic church, because it didn't have the statues. It didn't have much stained glass. It didn't have pews. It probably could have looked, been one of the pictures we put on the, is this a church or not? That something got lost. Like, it went, in the regards of a pendulum, it went too much to not enough. And now we don't know what we're there for. Because again, there's things that communicate to us what goes on. They're like, the movie theater. So you saw, oh yeah, it's a movie theater. I know what that is. That it sets us apart and it invites us in. So I think just the way they sought about doing that, is different, and perhaps a little too inviting or too informal. And you kind of lose a little bit of that sense of the sacred, because there aren't those distinctions. There aren't those, in a good way, divisions between, the nave and the sanctuary, that, oh, this is something set apart. And as you were mentioning that, and you were kind of starting off with the question, talking about the music, I did get a question about where the choir loft should be placed. And I don't think there's any official location for it. If you think back to like some of the old cathedrals, old churches, that was behind the altar would be where the choir was. And there was a church I was at in Spain, and the choir loft, the choir stalls were just gorgeous wood, beautiful engravings in there. But it was all behind the altar, all behind the sanctuary. So it has been behind. There's still some churches today where that's where it is. The church I grew up in, they were kind of up front, off to the side. And again, a lot of the grand cathedrals you might think of, it's up in the back, the very back of the church. Having grown up with them up front, it's not like, oh my gosh, why would you do that? But at the same point, you don't want that to be too distracting that it draws away from the altar, from the tabernacle. But if you've got this massive church and the choir loft is all the way in the back, and you have 5 people for mass, well, it might be a little bit harder to hear. And then you have all the acoustic considerations as well. But I think the ideal would be a place where it's, heard and able to serve its purpose well without being too distracting. But I think the norm tends to be, in my experience, in the back of the church. So I don't know if I addressed your initial question there either, Colton, but I hope I did.
No, you did. Thank you. I know in our experience at St. Dominic's, we're very blessed to have a large choir loft. And at least currently, during it is roped off and it's limited to musicians, but you know, if someone is in there for daily mass, many churches, the choir lofts are open, and oftentimes you can get a beautiful vantage point of some of these things that we're talking about. From an
some of the pictures that I had in there were from the choir lofts, and I love when there's nothing that says you can't go up. There's no rope. There's no door. I'm like, oh, I'm going up. Have stairs, we'll climb. Have loft, we'll climb. Because it gives you a different perspective. And I think speaking to that, like we're creatures of habit. You know, when I was in the seminary, I was the guy that would, you know, oh, Colton, you always sit there. Well, I'm here before you. I'm going to sit in your seat and make you sit somewhere else. A very good priest friend of mine that I met in the seminary, there was only, if he was bringing up the gifts for Mass, he had to sit on the opposite side of the church, of the chapel, because that's where those guys sat. And he's like, you know, I never look at these windows, because he sat in the same seat every day, every Mass, every morning prayer, every evening prayer. And I think we tend to do that too. My wife tends to go to the same spot. I'm like, let's sit over here. One, it changes things up. It gives you a different perspective. But two, like, hey, we've gone to the same Mass for 5 years, but I've never shook your hand for the sign of peace because you're three sections over. But to just, you know, oh, I always sit on the left. Well, let's sit on the right side. I always sit in the back. Well, let's sit up front. You know, to change things up, because again, we only know what we know, and you know, we might not know what the windows behind us are because we never look at them. So
great. Well, I think that's all the time we have for tonight. Thank you so much, Nick, once again, for
pleasure.
Off what hopefully is going to be a really exciting series. We're going to have a couple more lectures, more presentations this year. This is born out of a time when we are some of us trapped in our homes, and we're trying to find ways to relieve the social distance and engage with one another. But I think this could be a really fruitful way to engage us, not only, you know, mentally and scholarship, but also just spiritually, feeling attached to one another. So thank you all for your time tonight. For those of you who are members of the choir, I look forward to seeing you next week as we continue our coloring book. And I'll stay up to date with each of you, sending notifications about the next lecture that will hopefully be coming early in 2021. So thank you again, Mr. Petrillo. And
you're welcome.